And now it's time for our second plenary session. In this plenary, Scott Thornbury will talk about going back to the old normal. What have we learned from the new normal to take with us when we return to face-to-face teaching? In this talk, Scott Thornbury will review the best of both worlds, online and face-to-face, and argue that both modes work well only when we give the learners a voice. Scott Thornbury trains language teachers and writes about teaching and language. He is the series editor for the Cambridge Handbooks for Language Teachers and the author of 30 language teaching methods and 101 grammar questions. He lives in Spain. Please feel free to write any questions that you may have in the chat box, and we will try our best to answer them at the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Scott Thornbury, courtesy of Cambridge University Press.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you. Thanks everybody for making this possible. I see there's 437 people in the room, so I can't address you all by name, but I hope we can make this a little bit interactive. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay with you, Louise, yeah?
Yep, sure.
I'd just like to also, while I'm doing this, thank Cambridge University Press in Turkey for, and in Cambridge, of course, for arranging this. I've not been to Turkey for too long now. I've not been anywhere. This is as close as I can get, but it's great to see so many people here today. I've renamed the talk to be more accurate, back to the old normal, which was the sort of it's the idea. And before we start, I'm going to ask you a question, and just post your answers into the chat box, and I'll see how many I can manage to capture as they fly by. So this is the question. Yeah, I'm assuming that you've all been teaching online, and as have I. And so the question is, to get us going, is how does it feel? How did it feel? What are two words? Okay, not very interactive, hard, overwhelming, love it, tiring, challenging and senseless. I like the mute button. Challenge, interesting, getting better, overwhelmed. That's come up before. Funny, tiring, silent, proving and challenging, exhausting, too much sitting, radiation, challenging. Yeah, very hard. It's so hard. It's unpredictable. Thank you. Yeah, fantastic. And so a range of opinions here, from the kind of very negative to some of you actually quite positive. And I want to look at both sides in this talk and look at some of the positives that we maybe can take back into the real classroom, and some of the negatives that we can happily say goodbye to. And some of a warning too, I guess, that we shouldn't take some of the negatives back into the real classroom or forget what the positives of the real classroom are. So let's accentuate the positive and look at some of the things that are good about the online experience that we might have to sacrifice when we go back to real classrooms. I mean, clearly the comfort of and the convenience of working from home without having to commute, without having to travel to work in your own office is a huge advantage. And I think for many of us, it's going to be a bit of a drag to sort of get back on buses and public transport systems and traffic jams, etc., to get back to work. Nobody misses that. And the other thing I would add, there's a certain intimacy, even with large groups, that you get in an online class. I was reading the other day in the Guardian newspaper, there was an interview with a woman who teaches yoga, and she's had to teach yoga online. She says it's actually kind of nice. You know, even something physical like yoga, she gets inside people's homes. She sees their, you know, while the her student is on the floor doing some kind of posture, the cat walks in, yeah, or the phone rings, or the children run by, and there's a kind of, and she sees the intimate details of their kitchen, and there is a certain charm to that, I think. I mean, not everybody wants to share every detail of their home, particularly if they're competing for space, but there's something there, and you can exploit that. You can exploit that in ways that you can't do in the classroom. I'm going to do an activity with you now, which does exploit that, which is something I don't think you can do in the classroom. So for this activity, I want you to look at me, look at the space I'm in. It might help, if you can, to put the screen on speaker view. Yeah. So take note of all the details, because in a minute, I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to change some things. And you have to tell me what I've changed, okay? So you ready? Take a good look, okay? Right, you ready? I'm going to stop the video, plunge into darkness. Okay, I'm going to change three things. Okay, you ready? Okay, before I turn on the video again, the camera, tell me what you think in the chat box, what you think I might have changed. The plant. Hang on. This is a language class. Can we have some sentences, please? Not nouns, books, vase. Yeah, give me a sentence about the vase, the books. A sentence. You may have moved some furniture around. Fantastic, thank you. You might have changed your glasses, says Gizem. You must have changed the plant. This is great. I guess the plant is you're wearing a costume. The bookshelf is not there. The objects on the shelf. You may have changed your. Okay, right. Okay, I'm going to turn the camera on now, and you can tell me if you're right or not. Okay, so what have I changed? You have taken the jacket off. Thank you. A small vase is missing. Good, you're very observant. You've removed one cup. Very good. You've taken one of the vases. Yes, one of the bowls has gone from the bookshelf. One of the three. Okay, hang on. We've got one thing is the vases. What's the other thing? The jacket. And the third thing? Change your shirt? No. Your glasses. And yes, give me a sentence. Glasses, give me a sentence. What have I done to my glasses? Okay, your glasses changed. You have changed your brilliant glasses. Okay, yes, I have. Okay, so the three things. I've taken off my jacket. I've removed one of the bowls or vases or whatever you want to call them, and I've changed my glasses. I'll change them back. Yeah, but isn't that fun? Now, can you do that in the real classroom? Not really. It's based on an idea, an activity that's quite old, where to practice the present perfect, you send one student out of the classroom and you change some things in the classroom. And then the student comes back and he looks around and says, you have moved that chair. Okay, you have taken the books off the table, etc. To practice the present perfect, yeah? But that's only one student who gets the practice. In this activity I just did with you, everybody gets the practice. But as a teacher, you have to insist on full sentences because otherwise it's not practice of grammar. And you might want to model what grammar you want them to practice. I like to leave it open because it's kind of fun to see what people say. And after all, there's nothing wrong when people say you moved a vase or you have moved a vase. They're interchangeable in this context, but I might want to focus on the present perfect for things that have changed in recent moments. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do online, and it's exploiting the intimacy, if you like, of the online situation. But there's a lot of things you can't do. And we'll come to those in a minute. There are some good things that I think I would like to take back to the real classroom. And one of them is this notion of asynchronous learning. That is to say, learning outside the live sessions, yeah, what the students do when they're not in the live sessions. And I think as teachers, we've become a lot more resourceful now. We're a lot more familiar with the kinds of tools that are available for learners to do things when they're not in the live classroom. And in fact, we've realized that a lot of the very constructive learning and interaction can take place when students are not in the live classroom. If you think about it, the sort of things that they can do out of class include the boring things like grammar exercises through using different apps, etc. They can learn vocabulary learning, particularly using digital flashcards like Quizlet or Anki, for example, for increasing their vocabulary load. They can do the reading, both intensive and extensive reading literature, for example, reading readers, both either online or print. They can do writing activities out of class, as they used to do in the old days of homework. And they can do a lot of listening and viewing of YouTube videos, etc., in English outside of class. And also they can take part in chat forums, online threads, forums, whether it's the one that you have in your learning program, learning management program, or whether it's one that the learners set up themselves, like WhatsApp groups, etc. And having done all those kinds of things, that they can report back to the real classroom about what they've read, about who they've been speaking to, about what vocabulary they've learned, etc. And they can also tell other students about the good sites and the not so good sites, and the good apps and the not so good apps. Whereas the classroom, the live classroom, online, or when we go back to it, the real classroom is the place for real communication, real-time communication. Yeah, with real people in a real place. And I want to come back to that theme shortly. So that's one of the things we can take back. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because I realized I didn't turn on my sound because I'm going to play you something. Okay, here we go again. Another thing is digital feedback. Now, this was an idea that came up to me reading an article, I'll give you the reference in a minute, of a teacher teaching online, found he was able to give feedback much more effectively between lessons to students, particularly their written work, through various tools and apps. And this is what he said, Dave Dodgson, writing in Modern Language Teacher. And he says, there's ability to monitor the learner's work through feedback, including live comments on shared documents like Google Docs, for example, and feedback on request on plans, drafts, and other ideas. So the idea is they email him while they're writing a composition offline for tips, advice, etc. And he will do that. He has office hours which allow him to give immediate feedback when it's needed. And he says it's the quick turnaround that's so effective, the turning it around from the student's request to the immediate feedback. Students do not have to wait until our next live lesson to get feedback. And there's no delay while I collect notebooks in and review them and then return them. And in this case, going online actually causes less feedback lag for once. And one of the tools that he recommends is Screencast-O-Matic, which is one of many where you can record yourself giving feedback on students' work, like in this example with me talking to a student about a written conversation.
That's great. Thanks for sending me that. Let's have a look. I'm very impressed with your vocabulary. You've obviously been doing some research here, words like gargling, etc. I'm not sure about trifling, though. It sounds a little bit old-fashioned to me. But no, the good thing is you've divided it very neatly into the problems of having a cold and then some solutions of having a cold. And I like the way you begin with a question, although the grammar needs looking at there. How often do you?
Okay, so you get the idea. So giving personalized, individualized feedback on written work is something that perhaps we could carry over into real life. Let me just stop that. Now I'm stuck in it. This is the next thing I'm going to get to, is the
just running through it.
I can't get out of here. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop the share. So you can guess what one of the problems is in terms of the old normal. So let's go back. Oh no.
As I say, the problem.
Okay. Let's just. Sorry.
And the
I'm going to have to.
Solutions.
Aha. Okay. Got it. Are you with me? Yeah. Can you see the slide? Yep. Okay. So bad things to put behind us, the things that we can say goodbye to, hopefully. And one is the tendency, well documented on online learning, to lecture, to forget, all the things that we were trained to do about interactive classrooms, and simply lecture students. And this has been a problem with online delivery ever since the beginning of educational technology. This is a graphic showing how television was envisaged. This is the 1930s, how they envisaged using television for teaching anything. So you have the lecturer, the professor in his university or whatever, lecturing with a blackboard, and this is being broadcast to the long-suffering learner in their home. But it's all about lecturing and transmitting. And I think one of the things that one of the biggest criticisms of how the transition to remote teaching was engineered when it had to happen at the beginning of last year was that teachers simply carried on lecturing in their old fashion. And this was incredibly boring. It's boring in a live classroom, but it's doubly boring when you're doing it online. And before the pandemic, Larry Cuban on a blog post said it's far easier to lecture online. It's much harder. It's much harder to explicitly use cognitive teaching and learning and collaborative pedagogies online, like group work and pair work, etc. That's one of the things that we want to forget, the lecturing that we tend to get into. And I'll move through these quotes. Another thing to put behind us is invisibility. And one of the things, I don't know whether you're familiar with this. Does your class look like this? This is an extreme example, but not being able to see the students is a real disadvantage, clearly. And there's good reasons why students don't turn on their cams. I mean, it's often to do with bandwidth, etc. But it's also, I mentioned intimacy before, but they're protecting their intimacy. They don't want you to look into their homes or whatever. But the negative side of this is you don't know if the students are A, being attentive, or B, even physically present. You don't find out that they're not there until you put them into breakout rooms, and there's always one or two lingering around. So it's a hard call often to persuade your learners to turn their cams on, but I think it's something that you need to negotiate with them in a non-threatening way. As I say, there are good reasons, and also, as we'll see in a minute, it's very tiring to be confronted by all these faces, including your own, for a prolonged period of time. But it's a negative that we'll be happy to say goodbye to. I think for me, one of the biggest disadvantages is the lack of mobility. I mean, the inability to move students around physically. Two of my favorite kind of organizations in the real classroom are these kinds of ones. This comes from Jim Scrivener's book, Learning Teaching. Buzz groups, where you have groups, maybe they're doing a discussion, yeah, and you can move one student from each group after a while, and they can then tell the others what they've been discussing, etc. Now, conceivably, this is possible in breakout rooms, but it's not as easily managed. And I'll come back to the topic of breakout rooms now. Another one of my really favorite activities is this one on the right, what the wheel, or sometimes called the onion, because it's like there's two layers to it, or sometimes called a carousel, you know, a carousel at a fairground that goes round and round. So you have an outer circle of students facing in and an inner circle of students facing out, and they do the activity, whatever the activity is. It could be just explaining something that they have, like their family tree or a photo or whatever. They're telling the other person, the other one's asking questions about it, and then at a cue from the teacher, they all move around one. And then they do the same thing. And by doing the same thing, although they've got a new partner, they're able to recycle some of the same language, and it gets better and better as they go around. So here's a picture of me doing this at a conference, demonstrating it with a group of students, only 8, but there's 2 circles. It's not, you can't see it very clearly, but there's an outer circle of 4 and an inner circle of 4, and they are I can't remember what the task was. I think it was their family tree, their immediate family, asking and answering questions. And it's great. It's great. It's very easy to set up, but it's incredibly difficult to do anything like that online. It's one of the things I've had to say goodbye to. Another one is surveys, is getting the students. So the topic in the course book, for example, maybe, I don't know, health. Yeah. So you want to find out who the healthiest person is, or who the most health conscious person is in the class. So you get them to create a survey, yeah, in groups, questions that they're going to ask all the other students in the class to find out who is the healthiest. So they go into their groups and they compose some questions. How often do you go to the gym? Do you eat junk food? That kind of thing. And then they go off, they're reassigned to different groups to ask their questions. So one student from each group goes to another group, and they exchange the questions with that group. Okay, so that's possible online with breakout rooms. One breakout room, recreate, go to another breakout room. But the third stage just doesn't seem to be possible. When they go back to their original room to collate their answers. Yeah. So they've all been asking different students. They go back to their original room and they say, okay, what have you got? Yeah. Well, some students said they go to the gym every week. Some students never go to the gym. So what have we got? How many? 15 students go to the gym, blah, 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 etc. They collate and then they produce a report which they give to the class. And I do that again and again and again. It's very interactive and it's very easy to set up in the classroom, however big the classroom. And you get the opinions of all the students in the class. It just about works online, but you have to take away the third stage of going back to the original room unless you somehow can remember where, or it's not easy. It's not easy. And that's not the only problem with the breakout rooms, because you can't supervise what they're doing in the breakout rooms, except when you go in. And when you go in, you can't see what's going on in the other breakout rooms. Whereas in a classroom, experienced teachers can see if students are on task. You cannot tell if students are on task. I do not know why Zoom doesn't invent a tool whereby the teacher can immediately see what activity is going on in all the breakout rooms simultaneously by just seeing how many people are speaking in which rooms, yeah, how many people are interacting and so on. It must be easy to do, but they haven't done it. It means that we cannot tell what students are doing in the breakout rooms until we go into them, and then we go into one, we can't know. So it's not ideal. And I really miss that to the extent that I don't use the breakout rooms as much as I use group work, because I feel I've lost control of the students. What else to put behind us? Distraction. Students getting distracted by things that are going on in their home, or if they're working offline, distracted by things that are on the internet. As somebody said once, it's becoming apparent that wired students, that is to say online students, use technology less to learn than to distract themselves from learning. We all know how easy it is to be distracted online. And finally, technical failure. Yeah, you just saw me failing to be able to move the slides on because I was stuck in the video. So technical failure, but not just on the part of the teacher, on the part of the students themselves, although often it's the students who know more about the techniques than the teacher does. And then finally, burnout. It's very, very exhausting, as some of you said in the original comments. An article came out recently about how we are so fatigued by Zoom, not just teaching, but all the meetings we have and all the calls with family and friends, of course, which seems to be we're permanently on Zoom. And there's good evidence to show that it is exhausting. It is exhausting looking at all these faces and monitoring them. Okay. Some of the things that we have missed, and that have been difficult to recreate in the online classroom that I'm really looking forward to going back to, are simply presence. The physical presence of being in the room with other people. And we cannot underestimate this. Presence is one of the hardest things for the online teacher to achieve. As this writer, Larry Cuban, again, says in this blog post, that what's challenging for the online teacher is establishing a sense of emotional, cognitive, and instructional presence. Face-to-face teachers can do this because they are physically present. Online teachers are separated, obviously. And this is one of the problems. There's an interesting pre-COVID, pre-pandemia project in Uruguay, which put learners in touch with a teacher, a remote teacher for their English classes. It was called the CIBAL project. So kids were given tiny little laptops, and they had English teachers, lessons with an English teacher who was on a screen in front of the classroom or on their laptops. And this was to bring English to students whose teachers didn't necessarily speak English or not well enough to teach it. Highly successful scheme. But what was interesting is one of the people who was involved in this scheme, Graham Stanley, who I know personally, said the one thing we hear time and time again from the students when we ask them if there's anything we can do to make the experience better, they always say the same thing. They would prefer the teacher in the room with them physically. They would prefer the teacher in the room with them physically, not on a screen. They can see the teacher, they can interact with the teacher, but it's the physicality that's very important. And as another writer says on a blog post, students can stare at our faces on a screen all they want, or as long as we require, but is that presence? Is that presence just our face on a screen? So presence. And the other thing is activity. I've mentioned that already, the students moving around in groups, the physical classroom, the mobile classroom. It will be great to come back to that. There's so many activities that we can't do online, like, total physical response, like various kinds of games, etc., running dictations and so on, that are just not possible. And there's more to it than the activities, because the idea is that all learning is, in a sense, situated and active. It's not about internalizing facts. It's about participation. And this is a book that talking about general education, but it makes that point very clearly, that learning is situated. In contrast with learning as internalization, learning as increasing participation in communities of practice concerns and listen to this, the whole person acting in the world, the whole person acting in the world, not online, but in the world. I'll just skip that, but Leo Van Leer, a bit later on, says, when we base our lessons around activity as the focus, language becomes a constituent. Language becomes just one element, alongside movement, gesture, experiment, manipulation, focusing, planning, judging, and so on. Now, we can do those things online to a certain extent, but it's very inhibiting. It's like teaching outside of a tiny box, whereas in the classroom, as constrained as the classroom is, it does allow for movement, gesture, experiment, manipulation, and so on. Because after all as the anthropologist Malinowski said nearly a century ago, the meaning of language is derived from our experience of the physical world, our bodily experience. And I just want to kind of run along that theme for a moment, because I think one of the things that we forget is that learning is embodied. And especially language learning. It's not just about the brain. Learning is not just about thinking and cognition. It's about the whole physical body. Brains are in bodies. We can't take the brain out of the body. Bodies are in the world. We can't take the bodies out of the world. And meaningful action in these worlds is in large part socially constructed and conducted. That is to say, learning is socially constructed, and there is a physical element to it. And they've discovered this in mainstream education. For example, teaching maths, primary schools. A number of articles have come out recently showing how kids use gestures. Using gestures, they can remember their arithmetic. They can understand their arithmetic better. And this has been transferred into language learning, that children are learning their first language. They learn the meanings of new words better by acting them out, acting out the meanings of new words. And this obviously applies to second language as well. And people have done research into this, how students remember words better when they act them out, or when they see somebody else acting them out. And that's easily done in a real classroom. There's a French applied linguist who's made a whole study of this and developed a technique of teaching English, the grammar of English, through actions. I'll just give you the link, but I won't, we don't have time to watch the video, but there are videos of his available online. And for example, this one where an actor demonstrates the difference, or two dancers demonstrate the difference between will and going to through physical movements. And the whole grammar of English has been explained for him there, and for you there by him. And his point is that language is not just about expressing meaning, but it's about shaping meaning and performing meaning. And the operative word there is performing. So anything that the learners do to perform the second language through gestures, movements, drama, is going to help them learn. And that's much more easily done in the real classroom. Because as Claire Cramch says, teaching the multilingual subject, teaching the learner of another language, that is to say, means teaching language as a living form, experienced and remembered bodily. And earlier, and then she goes on to say, maybe other classes in the curriculum, maths and biology and history, etc., are about the brain. But she says the language class engages the whole body, its emotions, feelings, desires, and projections. And where can you engage the whole body better than in a physical space, not online? And Chris Brumford concluded 20 years ago that the internet cannot be a substitute for the holistic understanding that comes from direct meetings with individuals, the direct meetings with people, with the teacher, with the other students, the social aspect of language learning. Knowledge transfer, the transmission of knowledge by online, by teaching, lecturing online, cannot be a substitute for seeing, smelling, hearing, and walking through unfamiliar settings. So this is something that we've had to sacrifice, the physicality, the embodiment, the situatedness of learning. But I hope we've come to appreciate it even more, so that when we go back to the classroom, we'll realize that students doing group work or pair work isn't just about practicing their English. It's about practicing the social function of language learning. And a lot of research is being done and has been done into how learners interact in group work, not just what they say, but how they look at each other, how they move back, forward, how they gesture, etc. These are all components in the use of language, but also in the learning of language. The person from the article from which that diagram came, the author says, an understanding of what goes on in the interactions is best arrived at by close examination of the talk and embodied behavior of group work participants. It's not just what they say, it's what they do and how they move. So Dave Dodgson, I quoted him earlier talking about feedback, and he says, you know, digital feedback is one of the good things. There are a number of good things that we've gained from online teaching, but he says in summary, despite all the positives, I think we would all agree that being in the classroom is better. It's not just about learning tasks, but also about, this is the important thing, forging relationships, reacting to moments in real time, and seeing the students as part of the wider school, not just the class, but the school, the institution, and seeing them not just in 30-minute virtual bursts, but seeing them over the whole day in the corridors, on the playground, etc. Meanwhile, of course, there is a movement afoot to take advantage of online learning and maybe move everything online forever. And this was an article from the World Economic Forum claiming that the pandemic has changed education forever, not because it teaches us the benefits of real class learning, real face-to-face learning, but because it can substitute for real face-to-face learning. And you get a lot of headlines now coming out of Britain, for example, saying that online universities are here to stay. Students like them. Or in Australia, this came up the other day, they're going to redesign universities so they don't have lecture theatres anymore. They're going to take advantage of the fact that language learning can take place, or learning can take place offline. So this seems to me slightly worrying that there's this movement to rethink education as being essentially achievable online. Now, it may be the case that, yes, if this means less lecturing, that's a good thing, but it doesn't mean less presence, less physicality, less embodiment. That is not a good thing, because we know, particularly with language learning, that physicality, movement, gesture, and the social work that goes on in classrooms is all part of language learning. It's not an added extra. And here's a final quote before we finish, a rather longish one. There was a study which was done in 2012, before the pandemic, at a university in the United States. At this university, he says, we've analyzed which educational inputs best predict progress. Yeah, what is it that we do that best predicts progress? And the answer, he says, is unambiguous. By far, the factor that correlates most highly with gains in these skills is the amount of, listen for it, personal contact a student has with professors. Personal contact. And he goes on, not virtual contact, not online contact, not email contact, not even Zoom contact, but interaction with real live human beings, whether in the classroom or in the faculty offices or in the dining halls. And he goes on to say nothing else, not the curriculum, not what choices of the major, not the student's assessment, nothing. None of these things predicts self-reported gains in these critical capacities nearly as well as how much time a student spent with professors, how much time a student spent with professors. And I would add how much time students spent.
Mr. Thornbury, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. We have got about 1 minute left.
Yes, I'm just finishing up.
Thank you.
And so just to finish then, a talk that Ben Goldstein gave for Cambridge recently quotes me as saying, let's not use the new normal as a pretext to get rid of physical classrooms, to de-skill teachers, and to impose more and more online teaching. Learning, or language learning and language use, take place in physical, social, and bodily spaces. The learning of language should take place there too. And that's it. Thank you.